The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
If you are not moving forward and exploring and learning and discovering, you are falling backwards. We want peace, and we want a future that trends with less violence.
Didn't know what time it was, the lights were low.
Know thy enemy, know thyself. And if you are deceived in your own arrogance and your own dominance of the past, that what you did in the past is sufficient to win in the future, eventually you're going to be a dead man. And this Constitution that America has is the best hope of humanity. We have the creativity. God has given us the brains to create our future, to build it. The way to do that is not to ignore a new domain and new technologies. How do we use this knowledge God has given us to glorify God and not let evil people use it as a weapon against good people? We don't have to be victims. Technology does change fate. All right, hello and welcome to Space Revolution. And today the listeners are going to have a real treat. Our co-host today is one of the finest minds that I've been able to work with in my past, Dr. Peter Garretson. I first met him when we were both serving in uniform, and he is one of the greatest strategic minds, both for our military as a strategist for the Pentagon, but also in civil society, helping us understand what is coming. And so he is not only a published author, but he is active at helping our executive branch, our legislative branch, design policies and regulatory environments to help us succeed in the future. So Peter, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Steve, thank you so much for having me. It is great to be on camera together.
Yeah, I know. It's really an amazing future coming our way. And even in the last few months, extraordinary things are happening and at an accelerated rate. And so for our listeners, the title of this show is The Secret Race to Space. And Peter Garretson has written an entire book along with Nami Goswami, and she and Peter have kind of framed out this reality. And the reason I say it's a secret race to space is because most citizens in most countries do not realize what's coming. They don't realize what's out there and what it can mean for the human race. And Peter has done a fantastic job of laying that out in a series of books that we're going to talk through today. And Peter, over to you to kind of tee up the conversation we're going to have today, and how our listeners can start asking the right questions and have some resources they can go to read on their own, to learn on their own, and then have that be a doorway to other resources so that we as a citizen class in America are shaping our political leaders as well as our businesses to build that future that we know is possible.
Well, absolutely. Let me let me start by tying back to sort of your opening videos. And, first of all, I would say that there is a space race, a secret space race that most Americans really are not privy to. And it always astounds me because I spend so much of my time, thinking about this, when I realize how many Americans, how many citizens of our nation are not familiar with the race or its consequences, or its tie-in with the name of your show, The Space Revolution, because there is a tremendous revolution coming that's quite exciting. And it, of course, is the reason why there is a renewed space race today. I want to give a shout out. I was talking with Dean Cheng the other day, and Dean had just made the point that I thought was very interesting. He made the point that if the United States were to suddenly say, yeah, we're done, we're not going to have Artemis anymore, we're going to shut it down, we're going to shut down NASA, it would not stop China. They would continue on with their plan, and that their plan, while they might make minor adjustments in timing, is largely independent of what the United States does. And the reason why ties back to this idea of a space revolution. It is the perception of the People's Republic of China that space holds the key to vast amounts of energy and material that will determine who is the leader in the international system, and the leader carrying the banner of humanity further into the solar system. And toward that end, they have devised a very, very stepwise, methodical plan of crawl, walk, run in order to become the dominant power in the solar system. And that starts really with the moon. So I'll just pause right there to say that we are in the midst of a space revolution. That revolution will be extremely consequential for power on Earth, not just for prestige, but for fundamental economic power and its ability to translate into hard military power. And it is chiefly a contest between the People's Republic of China and the United States.
Thank you for framing it that way. And I'm going to bring up the title of your book and the picture of your book here for the audience. This is your homework assignment, Badlanders, and those listening to this. And the reason I really like this title is because if you, as a citizen of whatever country you live in and belong to, could see behind the scenes, and we could paint a picture of what is really going on with people who understand the power of this space revolution, you would see a desperate scramble for the high ground, the ultimate high ground. So the title of this book is perfect because it is a scramble. And it is because the first person that gets to this ultimate strategic high ground will be able to hold back any competitor for pennies on the dollar. And this gets back to the art of war, which I actually like to say is the art of peace. The art of peace is being so strategic, like Peter Garretson is, that the enemy doesn't even have a chance. Your competition doesn't have a chance. That you control the narrative, you control the battle rhythm, you control the pace and the timing and the tempo of economic advantage that then becomes military advantage, that then becomes the advantage to protect your culture and your values. So Scramble for the Skies is essential reading for anybody that wants to understand what's coming and why this is truly a race. But yet the race is not known to people because of the narrative war. The Chinese do not want, or the Russians, or anybody who is interested in being a part of this economy that will make the air, land, and sea economies pale in comparison. They don't want to animate the American culture and our superpower in America, which is our entrepreneur class, our free market, our inventors and innovators. They don't want to wake the sleeping giant. It's like the Japanese said after Pearl Harbor, their regret that they woke the sleeping giant, and the sleeping giant crushed the rest of the world through economic dominance, the power of our industrial and our inventors. So thank you for that title, Scramble for the Skies. And ultimately, this is a fight for whether American values are the values that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren abide by, or whether the values of other cultures are what they abide by. Because the nature of this power that starts with economic power, the nature of this power is, if you have it, your values rule. And if you do not have it, you must submit. There is no other option. So over to you, Peter.
Well, I completely agree. I have long framed this in the similar terms of the importance to our Constitution and whether or not we are in the ability to provide the blessings of liberty to our posterity. And the important thing to realize about space is that it conveys such tremendous power to those who can, occupy and secure it. Till now, it's conveyed kind of a soft power, of prestige. It's conveyed the ability to move through extremely destructive weapons across the world via intercontinental ballistic missiles. And it's provided overhead intelligence and targeting, principally of fixed targets that we have never had before. And our Space Force, which you had a important role in creating, is about to create a couple new, very meaningful increases in capabilities. So I expect very soon we will be fielding air moving target indicator and ground moving target indicator. And, basically you can think about this as like a type of radar from space that can track things that move. And we've never had that capability before, and that will be a truly important addition to America's power. But of course, we're not alone. And that's just sort of the looking down aspect, the ability, to either allow through or to stop weapons of mass destruction and missiles that transit through the Golden Dome that we're attempting to create. But as we move farther out, we have just vast resources of energy and material that are so vast that they're truly hard to comprehend. And I'll try to put it into perspective. So, when the Europeans discovered the New World and tried to jockey over who would have position in the New World, that that was perhaps like twice the land area that they were competing for on the European continent. But, the moon itself is like larger than the size of Africa. And the amount of material wealth in the inner solar system is 1 million-fold that of the Earth. That's so hard to wrap your head around. And then, the amount of energy that could be supplied just from the sun is like 1 billion-fold what we are able to collect and make use of on Earth. And so there is a tremendous possibility to push this production possibility frontier out. And the nation that is able to harness those resources and that energy will have an incredible industrial base advantage. So in the same way that we were the arsenal of democracy and we were freedom's forge in World War II, the nation that has access to these vast quantities of energy and material really has a tremendous advantage. And there are steps that we need to be taking technologically to be able to be on the leading edge of that advantage. And I try to direct a lot of my thinking and writing towards the policies that posture us to be in the best position to win that race.
That is really true. The other thing that I've mentioned to our listeners before, but it's worth reiterating in the context of your comments just now, is that it's almost an unlimited amount of resources, because there are companies out there now that have practical technologies and business plans to be able to drag asteroids closer to the Earth and create a an infinite source of kind of the mining of the raw resources that an economy in space can provide. And you just continue, you can have this long-term plan of always having a feeder belt of asteroids that you bring close enough to Earth to make the business case close of mining, whether it's the rare earth metals or the gold, silver, platinum, or just raw materials for 3D printing and construction in space. That it's an infinite feeder belt of resources. And we could do that without ever dealing with the moon. Now, the moon is there. We want to preserve the face of the moon so that it doesn't start looking like it has scars. It's great that the far side of the moon is something we never see, but we also want to be environmentally, good stewards of Mother Nature, both on Earth and in the heavens. But for me, the additional thing I'll say to this idea that we can reach to the skies for infinite energy, information, and resources over time, but we can also deliver it to any person on planet Earth for lower price points than we do now. Now, if you live in the West, in a developed country, the price points are pretty reasonable for your data or for your electricity or for your water. But that is not the case in many places in the world where energy, water, food, and money is used as a weapon against people. So this space revolution also has the benefit of unlocking the human potential, pulling people out of slavery, out of poverty, and out of ill health, because they can afford the energy, the information, and the resources to build a better future in their neighborhood. So these are a few of the attributes too that make this such an important high ground for America to be competitive in, and not to lose our nerve because we don't understand it, or more importantly, we don't lose our speed. Speed is life here. We don't lose our speed to be part of that ultimate economic high ground because we don't understand the consequences of what happens if we don't. And then I'll end here with these two examples. They're not exactly the same, but they're close. It would be like when the airplane was invented, that America decided that because the airplane could be used to drop a bomb on somebody's head, we refused to build airplanes. And then we would not have an air force, and we would not have transportation through the air. And the rest of the world would have it, and we would not. And you know what would happen if we had made that decision. The same is true for the Navy. If in the Federalist Papers they decided that, well, it's too expensive to build a Navy, therefore we will not have a Navy, then what would have happened in the War of 1812? What would have happened in subsequent conflicts? Now, we had other countries helping us, like Russia, for example, helping keep our country alive back in those early days. But, imagine what would happen if we decided never to build a Navy, and we could never defend the commerce in the open oceans. And again, the commerce of the space, the ocean of space, the commerce in the ocean of space will be bigger than air, land, and sea combined because of its network attributes and the vast amount of resources that exist there, so that we don't have to scar the earth. We can do all our heavy industry off Earth. And Jeff Bezos has said that. Elon Musk has said that. Great visionaries of our time have said that, and it is true.
So, I think one of the things that's hard for the average American to wrap their head around is the potential of space to scale. In fact, I find, it even seems difficult for, people who are established in the aerospace field to really, realize what is possible. And, you mentioned sort of the readiness of American industry to create a conveyor belt of asteroids that were coming in. And I absolutely believe that. I think, if we had the will and we had the financing available, either from private industry or from the government, we are at a place where there are companies who, could within 3 years, or even before the end of this administration, capture the first asteroid. And we're in a position where in that same time frame, we could also put down the first lunar space elevator. And, to to put this, in context, as that conveyor belt moves forward, right? You're talking about capturing, one after the other of small asteroids that are coming by the Earth and parking them, in a high orbit where you can, refine and pull their material out. And, that's something, like, a million metric tons, something like, 8 to 10 aircraft carriers worth of material. And, a similar amount, could be started to bring up and, of course, down on a lunar space elevator. And then eventually, with just a few Starship landings, you could emplace an electromagnetic catapult, commonly called a mass driver, that could bring, an enormous amount of material up. And what could you do with that material? In this case, we're not talking about returning, rare metals to Earth. We're talking about having the construction materials available to build things that humanity could never build in space before. And those would include, for example, solar power satellites of a scale that we could power our entire Earthbound civilization in just a few years, to have a complete 24-hour, emission-free grid. We're talking about the ability to build and scale AI data centers, where they're not, creating local environmental problems in people's backyard and, taking their, the water that they need. We're talking about the ability to get, the large scale construction materials of aluminum and silicon and iron for those purposes. But we're also talking about being able to, access the kind of precious metals that are important for industrial processes that can be very, very ecologically challenging to communities that have those concentrations. And so all this means the possibility of, a greener planet Earth, a much, much richer planet Earth, because there's a very high gear ratio between electricity as well as AI and the broader economy. So, we're talking about a future where we could easily grow, our GDP more than tenfold and uplift so many of the people who continue to live in poverty and add their intellectual gifts to the broader economy to allow us to move even faster.
It's very true. For example, one of the things that if you're not paying close attention to the details, an average person just listening to normal news sources might say our world is getting overpopulated, and therefore there's even people that suggest, well, we need to start thinning out the herd. Where there's too many people. But all you have to do is fly anywhere, and you look down and you see that the majority of planet Earth is desolate, meaning there's nobody living there. And the reason is because there's no water and there's no electricity. But if you could deliver water and electricity to any point on planet Earth affordably, now humans can spread out. And when you can start building habitats in space that allow for people to live in the same gravity environment and radiation environment and temperature and weather environment that we live here on Earth, meaning it doesn't matter to your body's health whether you're in space or whether you're on Earth. Now you can start expanding out even more and building beautiful habitats that are floating, but rotating in a way that gives you plants, animals, the sky, the sun, food, water, all the things that are beautiful that are part of the human experience. But the Earth is literally, we are just a pinprick of presence on the Earth as a human race at 8+ billion people. And there is no reason why we can't use our brains and the way I'll frame what you just said is any time in history, when you look at the arc of history and what things uplift the human condition, when you can increase the economic pie, it trends with less violence. It trends with better health. better security and better prosperity down to the individual level. And that's what we're talking about here. Space allows the human race to increase the pie so dramatically that the potential for a more peaceful, prosperous, and healthy future for every person on the planet becomes exponential compared to what we have done in the past. Because it is true that per capita, more people today, because of technology, live in better health, security, and prosperity than ever before. Because there's more people, there's still too many people that are living in ill health, insecurity, and poverty. And so we really are at this inflection point, in my opinion, in humanity, where we have the technology to really change fate. But we first have to look into our own minds and hearts and our souls to make sure that we design this journey to not fall into the traps we've seen in the past. And this means having people that are moral and ethical, that understand the need for the rule of law, but not too much law where you can't experiment and try and fail responsibly, so you could discover what doesn't work and what does work. So for me, the pieces of this journey that really will make my great-grandchildren happier, healthier, and more prosperous, and less likely to be slaves, whether it's slaves to taxation without representation, or it's slaves to people that are dominating them, the tyrants and despots that use money, food, water, shelter, and violence as a weapon against them. It gives them a fighting chance of never having to deal with those things, as long as they stay strong and they stay moral.
So you've brought up, I think, some really critical things, and I think they're the type of things that can really affect how a person views things. I know that I'm, not atypical in how I came to the space movement. And what I'll say is that there was a very important report in the 70s, called The Limits of Growth by the Club of Rome. And, it basically said that if we forecast, human growth, we're going to run out of all of our resources on the Earth, because the Earth is a closed system, and that, that will require basically a draconian type of power that would constrain, human growth, and perhaps even, deliberately, reduce the number of human beings on Earth. And I think a lot of that has sort of driven this pessimism of this generation to believe that perhaps we don't have as bright a future as our forefathers. But the reaction to that really was the space movement. The space movement looked at it and said, wait, but these facts are wrong. Earth is not a closed system. There's many, many, many more resources out. And in fact, the carrying capacity of the inner solar system, if we look at the resources, and it appears that we're mostly constrained by the amount of phosphorus, not other materials. So, at the moment, the best estimates are the carrying capacity of the inner solar systems using the asteroids, principally to build these kind of free-flying space colonies that have, internal Earth-like environments. This would be like the size of Long Island, New York, and have about 10 million people in it. It's called Island 3. And if your audience is looking for a great book to read, I actually don't think you can understand anything that's happening in the space in the space environment today if you haven't read Gerald O'Neill's High Frontier. So High Frontier was the first book to explore what it would be like to have a civilization, out in an industrial civilization out in space with people living and working in these type of free-flying habitats. But we could have 10 trillion human beings subsisting solely on the energy of the sun. And imagine the level of creativity and the number of stories, or as Bezos says, the number of Einsteins and Mozarts that you could have that large. In fact, even the Lagrange points around the moon are large enough that they could host each on either side more human beings than we currently have on Earth. So there is potentially an extremely bright future for humanity, but we have to want for it. We have to aim for it. And let me point out that a future where all those trillions of potential human beings are living in a kind of slavery, to the state without, rights that they can depend on, without courts that they can depend on, it would be no great thing to grow the number of prison planets, beyond Earth. But to grow the number of free societies where human beings can enjoy liberty, as our Constitution aims at. Now that is an exciting and worthwhile future to win.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that. And so here is the book he was referring to. And it is a must read. And we know this book is on the list in future Space Revolution shows, but let's introduce it here and we'll put it into the comments for this show too, because in addition to Scramble for the Skies, this is another one that's a must read. And, and as Peter said, it's not just that people can live happy and expansive lives in space, where it feels like Earth, except you can travel to different planets and different parts of the solar system. You can see new things and explore new things, but also on Earth, where we can explore in ways both undersea and on the land, and even in the skies. An existence that helps satisfy our intellectual curiosity, because this is another piece that is worth talking about, and that is human beings were designed to be curious and to explore and to discover. And if we don't practice that natural gene within us to aggressively be curious and satisfy that curiosity, if we don't practice this aggressive learning because we're excited about something and we want to know everything about it, and if we don't exercise the gene of exploration and therefore discovery, we not only shrivel up and blow away. It would be like you sitting in a chair for your whole life and never getting up and exercising. The body was meant to move, and the mind was meant to explore, discover, and learn. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here, is getting back to our roots as a human species. That this is our competitive advantage, so that we live in harmony with Mother Nature. And these movements that Peter referred to and I referred to, where people are saying, well, the solution to our problems is to shrivel up and to stop exploring and to thin the herd and to just live within our means. And living within your means is good. But what we're talking about is changing the game and saying, I will not accept a fate where I have to live within my means. I am going to create more means. And therefore more people can enjoy a life of liberty and the pursuit of happiness in their own way. So, the levels of complexity of this space revolution that we're talking about extend almost infinitely, but it's all rooted in the human spirit and the historic solutions to problems that make for a happier planet. And we are at that juncture where we are being asked to choose which path do you want to go down. Do you want to go down the path where technology changes fate for the better, or do you want to go down the path where we bury our head in the sand, we stop trying, and others will do this, as Peter pointed out, and the only losers would be Americans if we are not willing to take the will. And when you talk about capital investment, because people will say, well, this is too expensive, there's no way, why would we do this? I hearken back to, again, it's not a perfect analogy, but if Teddy Roosevelt were to say, well, building the Panama Canal is just too expensive, so we're not going to do it, it would have been a travesty. Other people would have eventually done it. But because America did it, it transformed the economy of these highways to new marketplaces. Cut the time in half, cut the cost in half. And when you can cut the cost and time in half and deliver, goods and services to people around the world, you become the dominant economy. And that then gave us the power to be able to defend our values against Hitler and the Third Reich.
We were kind of prior to the use of the nuclear weapon at the end of that war, we were a nation of profound technological optimism. And then sort of following, our creation and realization that we could also, wreak great harm with our technology. Many in the scientific and philosophical communities sort of retreated from a position of technological optimism. But the results of that retreat, have not been good for humanity. And, similarly, we were, for a very long period of our history, we were a frontier nation, and then that frontier closed. And I agree with you that, human beings, are an exploratory species. We are also a migratory species. And that, profoundly affects sort of who we are and how we choose to organize. And, I'm of the opinion that we sort of can have it all. There's no reason why the tools that we have in front of us could not give birth to much greater wealth and better ecological stewardship, much greater use of energy and energy that doesn't harm the biosphere, more human beings, but more human beings who are not unnecessarily crowding each other and can find new and exciting vistas for where to go. And so I fundamentally do believe that we have in front of us the possibility, of a tremendous future, and that a future that is worth winning. And I think, the space movement draws folks like that into it who want, to be part of it. It's very interesting, on Earth, we can see that when species get in one place and they get too crowded, certainly, they can sort of go to war, with each other over limited resources. But more profound things happen. You see that, when a particular area gets too dense in populations, say in particular types of insects, they will change from being sort of outward focused, very sort of progeny focused, and they will sort of retreat into sort of a very class system. They may lose many of their members may lose sexual abilities. But when that reopens and there's a new exploration, they change again. Their morphology changes, their behavior changes. And so, we have in front of us a choice of whether or not we can, sort of choose to collapse in upon ourselves in a much more fixed environment, and all the, negative behavioral changes that might mean for us, or we can choose to, expand and have that wonderful psychological effect, of believing that there is, infinitely more. And I should point out that, while sort of the proximity of our current technology is sort of within the inner solar system, and limited by, 10 trillion, people and, billion-fold our current energy levels, beyond that are the stars. And there's every reason to think that if we put our resources into thinking about, how to traverse that great distance, that we would find a way to do that. And I believe in a future where human beings are the carriers of life, and not just human life. One of the things that we did, as exploratory species was we would take plants and animals with us. We would seed new terrain. The Pacific Islanders brought many species across those islands. And so when humanity goes to other places, it will not just be us. We will be taking our biome, our microbiome, our most valuable plants, a great diversity of species. So human beings, are probably the only species on planet Earth that have the ability to extend Earth life and to take, the Mother Nature, and for all we know, the only life, outward from here, and to make sure that light of life and that light of consciousness is not extinguished.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. So one of the things I'd like to do as we kind of wrap this up is, have you think on some of the questions that our audience should be asking themselves as they are learning about this space revolution and what it means for humanity and what it means for again, prosperity, peace, and security of future generations of humanity. And one of the things I would like to ask our audience as Peter is kind of closing us up with these questions, and you have your reading assignments, and we're going to talk a couple of more books here that Peter's going to bring up in just a second. But when you take a look at the demographics of who is listening to this show right now, you will find that there are too few that are under the age of 30. And the young generation, and again, Peter and I both, we got to work together at a university where we got to see a lot of young people coming in. And there is a desperate desire for hope in the future. There is a desperation for a mindset that says we can build a better future. But oftentimes they have not been given the education in the school system or the university system that exposes them to what the space revolution could mean as they build their future and solve the problems that the generation that came before them were not able to solve. And I ask you to send this and other podcasts to every young person in your family, every person you know, so that we start planting the seeds of this hope that Peter's talking about. And the fact that this technology is here. It's just a matter of will to actually use it to build something that can change the game for the generation that's looking for the game to be changed. And so they are hungry to learn. They have been starved of information. They have been infected with ideologies that are the pessimistic approach that Peter was referring to, that there's no solution. Everything that has been invented or that will be invented has been invented. And all we have to do is live in these 15-minute cities and crowd together, which then has psychological negative consequences as well as economic consequences. It also allows for despots and tyrants to control people and to enslave them in ways that are not healthy for the human spirit, because we are also mavericks, we are pioneers, we are rebels, good rebels. This fierce sense of independence and self-sufficiency, where we demand our privacy but we also demand our freedom, and the rule of law, where when good people, good entrepreneurs build something and somebody tries to steal it, they are held accountable. They are stopped. So all of these mature understandings of human nature and how we can govern ourselves in a way that is productive and helpful for everyone. We need to get that to the young generation, because they have not been taught civics. They have not been taught what they need to know and do to be a good citizen. They have not been taught about governance structures that can optimize our constitutional values that were so beautifully written by our founding fathers. And we have slowly migrated away from some of those principles with this ideology that is not true to human nature. So this is, it's not just the homework assignment for you to read these books. It is to get this information to the young generation and start inspiring them to take hold of this, so they become CEOs and business leaders and politicians that help open the floodgates of all of this value and beauty that we are talking about, because it is here, it is true, and it's at our front door. All we have to do is open the door. So Peter, if you can just talk about some of the other books that they ought to take a look at, and I'll put those into the comments, and then also some of the questions you think, and you can kind of wrap us up here.
Absolutely. Well, I've already mentioned Gerald O'Neill's High Frontier, which I think is tremendously useful. So in my own books, Steve, you're kind enough to mention Scramble for the Skies. Scramble for the Skies is basically, I wrote that book, starting when we were at Air University together, because I believed that there was an ongoing gray zone conflict that we just were barely perceiving that would happen in space. And I was aware of these conversations in the space community about the vast economic and military potential of space. And I thought there needed to be a crossover book to international relations and space policy to put this in the language where people could understand. And so that book is meant to sort of say, what can we expect from sort of the next 200 years of what is expanding? And so it discusses the programs of the United States, China, India, and the middle powers to really go after space resources as well as their scale. The next book that you see here, that the next space race, was really near term, like, hey, what should we be doing right now to prevail against China in this race? What should be our posture? How should we be changing things? And I really think there are a lot of questions that are worth thinking about there. Like, what are the right things to be doing? How should we be organizing our moon base? How should we be organizing our military? What should be our focus if we're serious about this? And then, because oftentimes, that's not the most effective teaching tool, we did a number of war games, looked at 18 different scenarios that of things that we thought were definitely coming, but were likely to surprise the United States in sort of the next 20 years or so. And so Space Shock, my latest book there, explores, 18 scenarios that are likely to shock most people and be like, I didn't know that was coming. That's quite different. And so, in all of these, I think, the major questions are, what is the future that we want as humanity and as the United States? And if we want that future, how do we structure it? Because in my opinion, we have not structured either our civil, meaning NASA, our incentives for commercial, or our military correctly. That if we want this future, we need to build our institutions differently. We need to incentivize things differently. It isn't enough to have a moon base. That moon base has to be looking at productive capacity at scale. And, these books show what happens when other folks, go for that and go for military space power that, we may be, reticent to employ. So I would say, if you're interested in questions about where should we be going and how should we be going there, and I actually think these are among the most consequential questions, because when you look at, I try to look at things in first principle, what is biggest? And the energy and material in the solar system are bigger than anything we have on Earth. And if we find, or our adversaries find, a way to exploit them, it will affect who has power on Earth, and who has power on Earth affect who has freedom on Earth and in the future in space. And so those are questions that I think are way more consequential than most people talk about with regard to space. It isn't just about whether or not we can support our terrestrial warfighters in wars that probably are for the most part not existential. It isn't about whether or not we land somewhere first versus someone else. It really is about whether or not we are capturing the means of production that is going to determine the future of economic and military power, and therefore the liberty and freedom of human beings from this point forward.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Thank you very much for kind of walking us through not only those resources, but some of the consequential questions that really emerge from them. Do you want to talk about any other books, or is that a good way and place to kind of wrap this up?
I will say that each of my books is extensively referenced. So like on any topic, if you want to dive in on, asteroid mining or lunar mining or what's happening in China, each of those has a phenomenally long, list of references for that.
That's good. Well, I appreciate you kind of helping our listeners think through these things. And for our listeners, what I do is I bring on guests that really truly have done the research and are industry leaders or thought leaders. And Peter, I just thank you for being a pioneer for the good of humanity and pouring your entire life's work into a better future for our posterity. And, Nami Goswami is also a co-author with you. And as you read through that book and you look at some of her other publications, I think it will help our listeners really understand. So for us, Peter and I, who have been on this path for a number of years, helping the human race really take its next great step into the future, the hardest part is to get this to the youngest of our generation. And it's not too young to start with kids, even, ages 8 to 12, where they are just starting to frame their sense of being a hero, their sense of what they want to do that's meaningful, that helps other people, that is not self-centered, but rather centered on the fact that, again, we are wired as human beings to help one another, to love one another. And so I really encourage you to, every young person in your life, everybody you're mentoring, everybody you're trying to help, point them in these directions and ask them to read, and let's see what kind of sparks that lights. And the network effect is an amazing thing. You inspire one 10-year-old, and now that entire classroom that 10-year-old is in is inspired, and they inspire 10 more. And within a year, you've reached 1 million young kids who have seen something new, a place for them in the future where they can see themselves as a hero, not just for America, but for the human race. These are the kinds of things that just change humanity. And with the internet and all that we have built to be able to connect to one another as a human race, now more than ever before, you can light a fire in the heart of the human race to be moral, ethical, abiding by the rule of law, and thoughtful about how technology can shape and change fate for the better, as long as good people are gathering together and organizing and preventing evil people from using these technologies for evil purposes. That's ultimately the art of peace, is being so strong, so strategic, and so moral that evil people are held at bay. They are discoverable before they can do something bad. And we gang up, we as good people around the world, gang up on those that would use it for evil. And we make sure that it is abiding by these principles and values, that God loves all of us just like we love one another, and our parents love us. And we must have this attitude that every person is equally important. And that, the Chinese people are beautiful and the Russian people are beautiful. There are no enemies out there. There are just ideologies and governments that oftentimes will take it in a direction that's inconsistent with human nature. So we belong to one another as a human race. It's so important to believe that, to understand it, and to know it, so that we do not usher in conflict, but instead increase the economic pie and usher in cooperation, collaboration, and peace. This is the goal of this space revolution. And it starts with us educating ourselves and then sharing that education with others. So Peter, thank you so much for coming on board. And I hope you'll come on again sometime in the future as we continue telling this story, so that the world knows what is at their fingertips right now.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. You all have a great day, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
In a quiet town where beards grow wild and lips dare to crack without permission, one woman has suffered.
Hi, I'm Margie, and I'm Jadriet's mother.
But the world would come to know her by another name, Madame Margie, the moistureless.
Jay came home with a lip balm. It's called Soft Disclosure.
With one miraculous application, her power awakened.
Within one day, my lips were healed. It was miraculous.
But salvation came at a cost. For in the shadowed lands known only as Badlands,
you boys at Badlands are so handsome.
She saw potential.
You're covering up your beautiful faces.
And she made her demand.
Shave them all off.
Or face the consequences. Beard oil will not save you now.
And you'll look so much better.
This summer, moisturize wisely and guard your beard. Because Madame Margie, the moistureless, is always watching.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.